Welcome to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. In this podcast, we break down high-profile celebrity estate planning cases for advisors and their clients. Most celebrity estate catastrophes are based on the same issues that everyday people face, just with the volume turned up. Our goal is to identify and extract the individual estate planning issues that lie at the heart of each story. We then discuss what advisors should expect and how to avoid common pitfalls. Hosted by wealthmanagement.com senior editor David Lenok.
This podcast is sponsored by Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Silicon Valley Community Foundation specializes in supporting advisors. We provide tailored solutions and personalized support to deliver on your clients' philanthropic visions and deepen impact. To learn more, visit svcf.org or email us at donate@svcf.org. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of wealthmanagement.com's Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. For anyone new to the podcast, in each installment, myself and a guest take on a different celebrity estate and attempt to extract some key lessons that planners can apply to more traditional clients. The idea being that celebrity estate planning stories, although often ridiculous in their details, generally have at their cores very basic issues that could just as easily apply to non-famous or fabulously wealthy clients. To learn more about estate planning and how you can better serve your clients, visit wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. Our monthly journal features tax law updates, wealth planning, retirement planning, and much more, written by thought leaders in the industry. That's wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. I'd like to apologize in advance to our listeners for the state of my voice. I'm getting a little sick, so we've got kind of a Barry White thing going on. It's going to be a very special, very sexy episode apparently today. And we're joined, speaking of sexy, we're joined today by Don Ford. Don is the managing partner of Ford Bergner, a leading estate planning and probate firm with offices in Houston, Dallas, and Austin. He specializes in estate planning and probate for high net worth clients and is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. He's also one of the few attorneys in the state of Texas trained to conduct mediations in probate and guardianship cases, and he has served on the Guardianship Certification Board, which creates policy and oversees the regulation of private professional guardians in the state of Texas. Thanks so much for joining us, Don.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So our topic today is a little different than usual. It's not really a single celebrity, but more of a trend. Disinheritance for a child's own benefit. Benefit in scare quotes there, of course. Disinheritance is a dirty word to many, but it's become a fairly common occurrence in the past few years for a celebrity to come out and publicly state that they won't be leaving much to their children, instead choosing to spend down their wealth during life, or more likely, to pledge the vast majority to charity. Since our audience is largely financial advisors, the likely most well-known example of this phenomenon is Warren Buffett. The Oracle of Omaha has famously stated, after much observation of super wealthy families, here's my recommendation: leave the children enough so that they can do anything, but not enough that they can do nothing. But he's really far from the only one. Perhaps my own favorite quote on the subject comes from basketball star Shaquille O'Neal. Appropriately, the man who once deemed himself the big Aristotle summed his opinion on the matter of not leaving his fortune to his children up in 5 succinct words: we ain't rich, I'm rich. And what basically all these celebs share is a concern that too much money too fast will somehow corrupt their children with the dread disease affluenza, leaving them wanting for nothing, but also lazy and useless. Interestingly, this sentiment endures across a variety of backgrounds, from the child of a congressman in Buffett to an army brat in O'Neill, and all the way up to the caretakers of Gilded Age wealth in Gloria Vanderbilt and now her son Anderson Cooper. Cooper has said, I grew up watching money being lost and knowing it was being lost. I'll go with what my parents said, which is, college will be paid for, and then you gotta get on it. I don't believe in passing on huge amounts of money. I don't know what I'll have. I'm not that interested in money, but I don't have to have some sort of pot of gold for my son. Don, what's your opinion on the potential corrupting influence of a large inheritance, and what steps can more traditional clients take in lieu of disinheritance to try and prepare their children to inherit and manage money?
Well, it's actually a really timely, interesting topic. I'm seeing this question come up, just more and more. In fact, I had lunch with a couple guys from a large financial institution today, in fact, and we talked about this very topic over lunch today. You're seeing it more and more with clients who are concerned about, not corrupting their kids with the money and those kinds of things. And so, you see the rise of this concept of having a family meeting. In some situations, this financial institution today was telling me they've got an entire group at their firm that helps families facilitate through multiple generations a discussion among these family members of what does the wealth mean? How is it generated? What is the older generation's desire to see happen, in younger generations? They said, look, some of these conversations are tough conversations. There might be some yelling and screaming involved. There might be some disappointment involved. But opening up that conversation among these generations is really important. I think back to my own grandfather and my father, even to some extent, who thought we're a generation, we don't ever speak about those things with our kids. But if you've got that much money, speaking about it with your kids or your grandkids or your family members really is a smart way to do it, because you just set them up for failure if they just wake up one day and all of a sudden they've got $100 million dropped in their lap. So having a conversation and really defining what is our family perspective on this wealth and what we want to see happen with it long term, I think is really important.
Yeah, this is one of my very favorite topics also. And a lot of it is because when I like to ask various advisors when I run into them in the wild, how they feel about this, just because the answers are just so varied. It's sort of like the estate planning version of it. If you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office, right? Every advisor is his own sort of special snowflake with how they want to approach this idea of what a child's relationship with money should be and sort of how to properly cultivate that. You mentioned family meetings and sort of this idea of like creating a family mission plan or sort of a legacy plan. That can sound very grandiose, like the sort of thing that, you have to have. Only families with a family crest should be doing that sort of thing. It sounds like a very uppity sort of thing. But really what you're talking about is pretty simple, and any family can do it. It can scale way down. You don't have to have crazy wealth. Having a healthy relationship with money and sort of defining how your family makes its money and feels about the money or lack of money, as the case may be that it has, can be formational for children, and it's just a valuable thing for any and all families to do. This is not just something for people who are leaving hundreds of millions of dollars to their kids.
Well, that's true, 100%, right? Every family benefits from that. But you think about so many of the people that made money. I'm involved in my firm has a group that litigates complex estates. And we're involved in a case right now with a very large family here in Texas. If I said the organization that the father founded, all of your listeners would know what the organization is. And there's 4 kids, and the father and the mother who made all the money are just widely regarded as very nice people, just really wonderful people. And they've got 4 kids who are just doing nothing but bludgeoning each other with the money after dad is gone. You can feel certain from the stories I've heard about dad, he would never want his children to treat each other that way, to put their mother in the middle of those fights and all those things. And frankly, I think if he'd sat down with his kids and had a better communication across the board with all 4 kids, I think he had that with one of them, but not with all 4, then I think they would have benefited. And also being realistic about your kids' particular strengths and weaknesses. Putting the child in charge who is the one who's the most likely to hold a grudge is probably not the best idea. And so sometimes it's hard for mom and dad to think realistically about the characteristics of their children. Which one is going to be the most likely to cause problems, and how do I ensure that isn't going to be a problem long term? It is a tough conversation. It's a tough deal.
Yeah, and I think I always joke that we should just call this the communication podcast, because that's kind of what every episode ends up boiling down to. But in terms of figuring those things out about your kids, that just doesn't happen, right? Like that's part of, when you start having these conversations, then you find out how the kids are going to react and what their different capabilities are. Like, the number of times I've seen where, maybe there's a kid who seems like, for lack of a better term, like he's a jerk. And he's the one who's going to cause problems. But once you're actually dealing with money and stuff, it turns out he's the one with the head for it, and he's pragmatic, or she's pragmatic. and is actually not the one who's going to start problems over money. Is going to start, maybe it might start problems over something else, but their relationship with money is sort of very respectful. And so they can surprise you just because, they have certain personality traits in relation to other things in their life doesn't necessarily mean that their relationship with money is going to be the same.
That's 100% right. And so look, I mean, it's obviously the conversation is a little bit different if you're talking about an estate that's $100 million versus an estate that's $1 million,
Of
right?
course.
And if you're looking at those large estates with, large, and especially estates where there's a family business, and so you've got 4 or 5 kids that are going to share the family business, I do think that having that professional come in who's got the ability to really work with the family before they're thrown into the situation that mom or dad has died, I do think that conversation can be productive to help, develop those relationships and really see how the kids are going to interact with one another in making those decisions. We represented a company several years ago. The dad had died, had 5 or 6 kids, and of course, one kid was the one creating all the trouble. That one kid didn't have to get up and go to work at the company. She just got a check every year for about $1 million a year just for waking up. But that wasn't enough. She was upset. She thought her brothers were stealing from her, and there was no evidence of that at all. And, and I kept saying to myself, well, if somebody wanted to send me $1 million check every year at the beginning of the year just for showing up, I'd send them, a thank you note and say, you won't hear from me again until next year, But some kids just aren't like that. Some of the kids just have a very different perspective. And that family actually brought in a psychologist to work with the family, work with all these siblings in managing this company to try to iron out some of those differences. And it worked with all but that one. All of them had very strong opinions, and the others could all get on the same page except the one. And it's a very difficult bridge to cross when you've got that one that's really struggling to get on board with everybody else.
Yeah, and it's a lot about creating and managing expectations, right? And that's kind of a lot of what can happen in these meetings as well. Because
Sure.
you'd be surprised, like I'm sure as you know, like, kids will put up with pretty wacky setups if that's kind of how it's always been and they're just used to it. Whereas if that same setup were out of the blue sort of sprung on them one day, they would be horrified. There's a lot of like surprise element that goes into this too, where if you have sort of a no-show person in the business, like if that's explained by the parents why it's happening, why it is that way to the other kids, and then they sort of create their own relationship about it and they sort of get used to the situation and they know sort of the logic behind it, assuming there is some sort of logic behind it to explain, then they're going to have it's going to be much more palatable to them the vast majority of the time than it is if it's just like, why is it like this? And we never talk about it. I don't understand. I'm the one doing the work. Why is so-and-so getting benefit? And it's just never addressed because, for a million different reasons, mom and dad are too busy, or it's go talk about money or whatever have you, that can fester. And it goes both ways,
Sure.
So that's the idea. I think a lot of this is just to set up how things are going to be and, maybe make some minor changes based on feedback, but not necessarily. And just ensure that like everyone knows the score before the people who are sort of creating it are gone.
Right. I had an interesting client several years ago that was charitably inclined, wanted to benefit their kids, but was also charitably inclined. And so one of the things that they said, look, our kids are, they get along well, but I mean, they're not super close, but they get along well. There's no big problems. I mean, they said, look, when we're gone, we want to promote them having a reason to have to get together and have to agree on something. And so they created a portion of their wealth that they designated to go in a charitable trust. And they said, look, I want all 3 of the kids to have to get together once a year, and each one gets to make a suggestion as to charities to benefit. And then a part of the distribution each year is going to go to each one's charity, and they all authorize it together. And I thought that was an interesting effort on their part, not to take money out and decide how it goes to the kids, but to say, okay, we're going to get them to work together in benefiting somebody else, but that's what's going to be the draw to tie them to work together once we're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was an interesting, good idea from the parents, because the kids, if they're having to make decisions about which kid gets how much money every year, they could differ extensively. But if they're going to decide on how much is going to charity that they're never going to get anyway, they're going to how much is going to go to charity and what charity do we want to benefit this year. I thought that was a great way to give the kids a common purpose that they probably could all get around and hopefully draw their kids closer together rather than farther apart.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think that charity and philanthropy is like a wonderful tool to leverage in this area in general. Like, I mean, you could take that same structure that you just mentioned and also get great value out of doing it with the kids while they're kids during, and everyone's alive.
Correct.
And it could just have a different focus as opposed to bringing them together. It can just like teach them about money. And there's no like the failure state is that a charity gets money, like the wrong charity gets money, I guess. Like there's no stakes, right? It's all good, and they're sort of just learning how to work together and manage things. So it's an interesting, very versatile tool that you can use either after death or even during life when kids are young.
Something else I've seen clients do that I think is always an interesting concept if your family enjoys one another. I've seen clients that say, hey, once a year, we're going to take a trip and we're going to go to the Cayman Islands or we're going to go to Colorado or we're going to take everybody. And that's going to be our family business meeting to review the family finances, review the family goals, but at the same time, have a fun bonding component in there to where it was something that everybody looked forward to, not, oh gosh, we got to go see mom and dad and talk about the money. I've had clients that have had good success sometimes with that effort also to make it a fun event, but also, actually have a business part of it where we talk about this is how we're doing and this is what we expect of everybody and what are your thoughts? Get input from the kids, which gets back to that concept of really involving the kids earlier rather than dropping it on them, when mom and dad are gone. We've got a client right now just has hired us in the last month or so. His dad died recently with $100 million in his estate, 2 kids. The kids had no idea that the dad had $100 million. No idea. Never thought.
How is it possible? That's what I always wonder. Sorry to interrupt. I always wonder with the don't tell your kids people. And it's just like, don't they go to their friends' houses and see that it's different?
I mean, in this case, dad was 96 or something when he died.
Okay, we're talking about the kids are 70. I see. Okay, yeah.
When the kids are 70, but at the same time, you sit there and you still go, okay, how did dad not, somehow give away and I think the kids knew, oh, dad's comfortable, but they never knew that there was anywhere close to $100 million in assets, right? And so the reason the client has hired us, he's like, look, I don't know. I'm not sure what all I even need to be doing with all this. It presents a lot of challenges that they don't even know what to do. And frankly, they're having to pay a lot of estate taxes because the dad didn't do a very good job of even planning for the estate tax side of it, right? They feel confident that the dad would not be thrilled about paying a significant estate tax bill. But the dad also sounds like was just too cheap to go do anything about trying to minimize the estate taxes or let anybody know that he had all that money. And so it is interesting when, the kids wake up to this revelation that dad's gone, but he left behind a huge fortune.
I mean, it's dangerous. And you got to find a balance, right? Because it's like, you obviously have kind of like a lottery winner situation there, right? Where like if you took a farmer and like all of a sudden he had $100 million, like he's not going to be able to deal with that. No matter how good he's going to have great work ethic, but that won't matter because it's just a different skill set. And the same thing can kind of happen like if you're preparing a kid to be wealthy his whole life and then there's no money and you expect him to be a farmer, it's going to be the same thing. So he's going to have valuable money skills, but he'll have no farming skills. So what was the point? That's kind of, so there's opposite extremes that are sort of equally disastrous here, and the truth is in the middle somewhere.
That's right. No, that's 100% correct. So we see clients all over the spectrum on these issues, right? And what I try to encourage, like you asked about drafting and how you draft around some of these issues from an estate planning perspective. And when I try to encourage clients to think about their kids' attributes, some of that goes into the drafting as well. How do we take into consideration the fact that one of the kids is really not very good with money? I had a client just the other day, not a huge client, but a client that said, look, we have one daughter who we don't want her to have any access to the money until she's 65. And we've got 2 others that we're okay with them having access to it at 40. I cautioned them. I said, look, when you treat your daughters differently under your estate planning, it has the potential to create animosity between them. And they said, look, the problems that the one daughter has are so significant in our opinion that we're willing to risk the animosity between the daughters in order to protect the one daughter for a longer period of time. And they made it. I think they made a rational decision. They made a well-reasoned decision, which I thought was to their credit to have done so, because it's tough to say we're going to treat our kids differently, right? My own dad, when I turned 16, I had worked hard and saved money, and I had all the money saved up to buy a car, which my parents had told me I was going to have to do. And because I'd worked so hard, my dad and my grandfather matched the amount of money that I had saved. So they would buy me the car, and I could save the money, and I could enjoy the fruits of my labors. My brother, 19 months later, had not saved a dime, but my dad thought, oh, well, we've got to do the same thing for him we did for you, even though he didn't put in the same effort. And my dad, for the sake of being fair, bought my brother a car, which less than a year later, my brother had blown up on the side of a road, burned up on the side of a road, and had no car. And today, my brother will tell you he never should have gotten a car when he was 16. My dad should not have been fair with him. But parents sometimes feel like they've got to be fair and treat all the kids exactly equally. And I thought these parents did a good job of saying, we shouldn't do that because of the particular circumstances of our kids. And I thought they were to be commended for that.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of this question of like what is fair is such an interesting one in estate planning specifically, and I guess in all sort of family relation, because it is relative. Like what's fair for one person is not necessarily fair for another, and it depends entirely on their personality and sort of their circumstances. And a lot of times, all the other things we've talked about today, these various communications, can be used in alongside the drafting to sort of try and take the edges off of, when you're going with a quote unquote unfair split, like you're talking about, where the people are being treated differently, where if you explain it to them how it's happening when the parents are alive and, maybe, well, you're going to get something in this area that the other one won't, you have some sort of give and take where they can see the thought process. They may not be thrilled about it, but, it's more likely that they'll understand than if all of a sudden, they just see the document in black letter and it's like, oh, well, did mom and dad not love me as much? Like, what's happening? Like, all of a sudden without, the person there to explain themselves and explain their logic, the mind can run wild and it can really sort of create problems where there didn't necessarily need to be one.
Well, 100%, right? And I say that to clients all the time. I'm like, look, if you're gonna treat the kids unequally or do something kind of unusual, please sit down and talk to your kids ahead of time so that they don't wake up one day and go, wait a minute, mom must have loved you more because she gave you a slightly bigger share of the estate. When mom said to me, the estate planning lawyer, look, my one child makes tons of money as a lawyer and my other child's a teacher and, will never make as much money. And so I want to give the one child a little bit more just because she'll need it more than my lawyer son will need it. Perfectly rational, solid basis for treating them unequally. But in black and white, after mom's gone and she can't explain herself, boy, it sure does read poorly sometimes. And having mom explain it ahead of time is definitely the best way to go.
And yeah, and to clarify, it's for both parties. Like, choose my own personal example. My grandparents had a family business, nothing crazy, but just a payroll business, pretty standard. And when my grandfather, they had 3 kids, my mother and her 2 older brothers. And the 2 older brothers both worked in the business. My mother was a stay-at-home mom and then a nursery school teacher later, but she sort of played a more caretaker role with my grandparents later in their life. But the oldest brother was the one who really stuck with the business and took the leadership role and really took things on. The middle brother was kind of there, but he had some sort of mental illness problems. He wasn't capable of doing everything that the older brother could do for that reason. And then my mother wasn't really involved in the business other than when they really needed her to come in and do something. When my grandparents died, they left 70% to the uncle who was running the business and then 15% to each of the other kids in sort of recognition. This is uneven distribution of the assets because he's the one running it. He does all the stuff. And at the end of the day, he was the one who was insulted by that distribution.
Huh.
The oldest brother, because he's like, should they? He thought that 15% of there's this other 30% of what he's running that he's not getting. And this all happened because my grandparents didn't tell them that this was the way it was going to go down. So even when you're making an unequal distribution in this way that you think is sort of being fair, the person that you're being fair to may take umbrage at it. You never know until you run it by them. So in this case, it was like the person who was getting all the stuff was the one who was like outraged by the split, even though it was unequal in their favor. It wasn't unequal enough because they thought they should have gotten 100% of that. And there's no way to tell that without talking to them first.
Yeah, no, it's funny that, in my mind, the one who's got the 70% share in that stake, and the siblings are getting 15%. On some levels, you've been successful, you've achieved, you maybe have more horsepower than your siblings do in terms of working and leading an organization and all that. And so on some levels, it's you doing something. For me, I would think it's a way for me to provide a benefit to my siblings who maybe don't have quite the capability that I have. But then some people just take it the exact opposite way and say, I need to be compensated for everything I've done and not worry about anybody else.
Yeah, and I think the important point to realize there is that, like, to a certain degree, both of those are completely valid feelings.
Correct.
Right. It all depends on the family, and maybe you think that he's a jerk for saying, "Oh, why you get anything?" But in his eyes, he's been running the business for 30 years. Like, why would you get anything? It's like, sure. You're dealing. That's the problem. Is that there's no right or wrong answer. There's no one. Everyone's being logical. They're just logical from their own point of view, and you have to sort of figure out 100%. What works. And it's never as black and white as you hope it would be, where like, well, this is the jerk and this is the not jerk, and here's the good guy and the bad guy, and we'll just do this. And it's like, it's just never like that. You have to talk it out and make sure, because everyone's a jerk in their own favor a little bit. So
everybody's a little bit self-interested, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're exactly right. It always depends on perspective, and every family is different. And I try to tell clients that, look, they start telling me issues about their kids, and I can say, well, look, in the normal situation, here's what I might suggest. But I said, your children. I don't know your children, right? You have to think about how your family works and how your kids operate and how they interact with one another. I can't tell you that. I can just tell you kind of some norms of what I've seen over, nearly 30 years of doing this. Some clients appreciate that, and some clients are perplexed by that. So
there's that sort of keeping up with the Joneses. Oh, what's normal? And it's like, well, nothing's normal. Everyone's family's completely screwed up, but nobody wants to admit that.
But some people have this mindset too of, and I think this is a mindset that's going away. But look, my oldest son is this one, and maybe he's not. He's the artist. He's not the accountant in the family, but I'm still going to make him the executor or the trustee because he's the oldest boy. Right. And they have these somewhat antiquated ideas of, well, because they're the oldest child, I have to make them the one they're the oldest son. So I have to make them. No, think about the attributes of your kids. Yeah. If the oldest one's the artist who's never held down a job, he's probably not the best one to be the executor and be in charge of all the money.
Yeah, I think that one's maybe going the way of the dodo, but I imagine someone who's hung up on X and son's business when really it should be X and daughter. Is probably one that you run into a lot.
Yeah, right. No, that's true. And look, one of the things that we come up with occasionally as a concern in these scenarios, it's always a concern that they don't want the in-law, the children-in-law, to benefit from their estate. Right? Mm-hmm. Very rarely does somebody want the children-in-law. But the parents being concerned about, well, how do I protect my child against their spouse? How do I protect my grandchildren against the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law that I don't particularly trust or care for? That's a tough conversation sometimes with these families as well. Well, because the son says, well, my wife is the greatest person on the planet, and why are my parents being mean to her? And, the reality is 99.9% of the parents out there don't want their daughter-in-law or son-in-law to benefit from their money if their child were to pass away. But their kid doesn't always see it the same way in relation to their spouse. So that's always a tough part of the conversation as well, is how to protect the money in the bloodline, but not create family friction by doing so.
Yeah, and those are the sort of topics that sort of make these such scary conversations to have, though, right? Because that's such a prickly topic to even introduce in a way that's not insulting.
Right.
Like,
That's right.
forget about like actually working something out. Just like proposing it, just like getting it started without someone getting pissed off and leaving the room is like
Sure.
exceptionally difficult and really takes a certain amount of planning before the meeting even would happen.
Well, and so look, I mean, in the families that are large enough to support it, having that professional who is a part of
Hmm.
that conversation, to have them facilitate that conversation, boy, that's where they really probably prove their worth is helping to bridge the gap on that communicate on that discussion. I mean, in my own, not necessarily my family, but just my friends and people I'm close with in my life, this topic has come up so many different times. Well, you'll never believe that my in-laws don't want me to. And I say, well, look, 99.9% of all in-laws feel exactly the same way. And most of my clients, when doing estate planning, all do exactly what your in-laws are doing. Really? Yeah, that's exactly how that works every single time. And sometimes when they realize that it's not personal to them, it's just how it works most of the time. Some have less hard feelings about it at that point, which is nice.
I think that's a lot of people because it's so easy with with family and money particularly to jump to why do you hate me so much? Like you just go straight there, or why do you like someone so
Right.
better than me? Because you're divvying things up and you're dealing with such touchy topics. But like once you sort of encourage the clients, and this is like you said, where advisors can come in, sort of take a step back and be like, traditionally, this is what I'm seeing. Traditionally, this is what I've done with clients, and the same thing. This is, this happens commonly enough that I have like sort of a way that I usually deal with it. This is not
Right.
something that I'm stumped by because I don't know why they hate you so much either. That can play a large role in sort of diffusing the situation, right? By just presenting it as like, no, this is like to get over yourself, in a nice way. this is this is less about your interpersonal relationship and more just, this is how families function. Step kids don't like their step parents. It's a tale as old as time. Like it happens.
Yeah. No. It can tend to make Christmas and Thanksgiving holiday dinners awkward, right? Which tis the season for all of that. But hopefully, those communications, if they get past the tough conversations, hopefully they can get to a point where they, you know, can either accept the issues and move on and be friendly with one another, or they can come to a point where they really understand, hey, this makes sense, and I'm okay with that, and it really helps to promote the family relationships.
Yeah.
And today, not to get too political about this, but you just see so much these days about the decline of people's ability to be able to interact with one another and have tough conversations and have the ability to disagree about something but still treat each other as family and with love and respect. It's a problem generationally, and then it just gets exacerbated, it seems like, within families, and that's just so too bad because families are can generally be wonderful, right?
Mhm. It's interesting. It's one of
It's
those things where I tend to always say that like the nice things about these conversations is that they naturally beget more conversations. And it's kind of like pushing a ball down a hill. But nowadays, there is sort of that issue, and this is again where sort of the trusted advisor can come in to sort of keep guiding things back in the right direction. Where like, maybe if there was a blow up over the Thanksgiving dinner table, the next, in the past, a couple of weeks later, while they're still, when they're less mad about it, they can see the other side and they come back together and sort of talk about it. Whereas, nowadays, maybe they're running to their respective Fox News, MSNBC broadcasts and never talking about it again. And that's sort of where the advisor as an intermediary can come in and say like, hey, listen, like, we don't agree on every single aspect of this, but here's the kernel of what they were saying that should relate to you. And here's the kernel of what you were saying that could relate to them. And what can we do? And sort
right.
of the advisor can sort of grease the wheels of progress there, where that ball used to kind of roll downhill on its own, but maybe nowadays less so, because it's so easy to sort of silo yourself off.
Yeah, I saw an interview that Oprah was doing. I'm not a big Oprah watcher, but I saw a clip of something that Oprah was interviewing these people, and some of them hadn't talked to their family members in 4 or 5 years because they disagreed on something politically. And I'm thinking, to miss out on those years, as somebody who's lost a parent, to think about missing out on those years that can disappear so easily and so quickly, because you disagreed about something that in the grand scheme of things really doesn't matter. you know that's an unfortunate circumstance, and so having those tough conversations and getting past them is definitely a worthy effort for sure.
So that's about all the time that we have for today. I'd love to thank Don Ford for coming on and talking about family and money and death and all these super easy topics to address that people aren't scared about at all. Thanks so much for coming on, Don.
Hey, David, it was great to visit with you. I enjoyed doing it. I look forward to next time.
Absolutely, me too. And for all our listeners, I'll see you, or I guess you'll hear me, on the next episode of Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. This podcast is sponsored by Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Silicon Valley Community Foundation specializes in supporting advisors. We provide tailored solutions and personalized support to deliver on your clients' philanthropic visions and deepen impact. To learn more, visit svcf.org or email us at donate@svcf.org.
Thank you for listening to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. Click the subscribe button below to become notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InformaWealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.